Hi everyone. So we cannot start. Though Mark is not calling through Zoom, but Mark is here with my WeChat, so he can speak on WeChat, and I hope everyone can hear his voice. So let me because we already passed 30 minutes, so I'm just get started. So actually today we will invite our guest Mark Engel. Yeah, he's a startup entrepreneur, is very successfully, and I'd like to have him do his self-introduction, and after that he will give us a presentation of his company and the technology and what he's doing, and then finally about 10 minutes and we can have questions from the audience. If you have any questions, you can just raise up and put up your questions, and Mark will answer. Okay, so Mark, please.
Good morning, everybody. Apologize. I guess we are a biotech company, not a technology company, and struggling like everybody else with quarantine issues. So my personal introduction, I've been building life science companies in China for the last more than 25 years. I've built a pharmaceutical company. I've built one of the largest healthcare technology companies. I've built one of the largest clinical trial companies. And it seems all of my friends remember I built quite a large medical supply company. So it seems that I've been doing nothing but working on shipping masks for the last 2 weeks. But in any case, it has been a wonderful adventure over the last 25 years, built a lot of close relationships. And I think that tells a little bit about the background of our company. The company was really founded by some old friends who quite experienced in this field. And we got together and we decided, well, biology versus bacteria might be a really interesting opportunity. And that's how the company was started by myself and Li Ge, who's the founder of Wuxi AppTech, and then another old friend of ours, Guo Guangcheng from Foshan, joined quite early as well. So that's really my personal background. I've been doing this for a long time, and this company was really started by the fact that Ge and I had both been to a burn hospital and saw roughly 40% of the patients here in China in burn hospitals with an antibiotic-resistant infection, often leading to induced comas. And we just simply said, we need to try and do something about this.
Yeah, thanks. And actually, I think for the companies focus the product, because the I think because the antivirus and all these anti-infections issues are very very serious, and the future market is big. And actually, with this COVID-19, actually some of the patients finally died from the other side effects and the pneumonia and the pneumonia-related side effects. And some of the patients, they got infections. And I think Mark's the company's technology, the features and the license, they can cure some of the symptoms, and they will actually they did a lot, not only the R&D, but also they did some kind of trials. So now we can have Mark to have more introduction about his company. Okay, maybe Haoran, you can help to present the PPT, and Mark can go with the PPT.
Sure. So there's, I'm not sure whether you have both of the PowerPoints or not, but I did a very quick one on ventilator-associated pneumonia and and what we're doing about that one, and so and then also just a background of our company. So would you like me to do both of those, or only about the company, and then talk as I'm doing that about the ventilator-associated pneumonia?
You can talk about the pneumonia at first, and then they'll go with PPT.
Okay, so one of the things that's not surprising is that is that ventilator-associated pneumonia is quite common with COVID-19 patients.
Yes.
What we see, generally speaking, is that ventilator-associated pneumonia occurs in about 25% of all ventilated patients. We have, and when we see this, we get a significant mortality of those patients. So when it comes to ventilator-associated pneumonia, depending on the country, we see someplace between 40 and 60% of those patients end up dying when we see a multi-drug resistant bacteria. China is on the high end of that because of the fact that antibiotic resistance is particularly high here. But even in low markets, when we see a ventilator-acquired infection that is antibiotic resistant, the death rate is still quite high. And the cost, of course, is high. So when we see the infections in China, when we see the cost per patient, it's roughly 14,000 US, 90,000 UN. And in the US, which is obviously more expensive, the cost of ventilator-associated infections is about $40,000 per case. We're just starting to see the data for COVID-19 patients, and the data we're seeing is somewhat astonishing. Of those patients that are dying, about 57% of those have a secondary bacterial infection, and most of those, and we don't really have good data, but most of those seem to be antibiotic resistant. And from the next slide, you'll see why. So it is our belief, and increasingly the belief of a number of governments, that if we're able to reduce the secondary infections, we will be able to reduce mortality rates. And so we've started on a number of different things, both in our Wuhan lab and in our Montreal facility, to work on solutions for treating ventilator-acquired infections. And we've got one that's reasonably advanced already through animal testing and very, very impressive results for staph infections. You can see from the next slide on what these infections actually are. It varies widely by age range, and it varies widely by country. But when it comes to antibiotic-resistant ones, we're seeing Bomani, Pseudomonas, Klebsiella, and staph as being the leading causes of death. And when you look at these at isolates coming out of Chinese hospital systems from ventilator-acquired infections, you can see antibiotic resistant rates that are amazingly high. So you see it 86% for staph, 64% for Bomani, 50% for Klebsiella. And so there's a tremendous need to rapidly be able to do this, and it's to cut these down. And it's very difficult to do with small molecules, because they have a great deal of difficulty going all the way to the infections. And therefore, we're looking at biology as really the only solutions. And as I said, our staph solution, when delivered intratracheally, basically 100% kills the staph in the lungs. So that looks very promising, and we hope to be rapidly developing those programs. We've just applied for an $8 million grant from the Wuhan government to support the development of Bomani and further development of Pseudomonas license. So that's basically a situation. It's very simple. The rate of death associated, the number of deaths that have ventilator-associated pneumonia in China is very high, and there's a need to very rapidly figure out how to reduce these secondary infections in order to reduce the mortality rates.
Yes, that's a problem.
By the way, U.S. colleagues at Mount Sinai and Presbyterian hospitals in New York are reporting something around 30% of deaths are showing secondary bacterial infections.
Okay, now you can tell us more about Phagelux.
So as I mentioned, Phagelux was started by people who are very familiar in terms of commercializing products. And we all know that there's some significant problems in commercializing antibiotics. It's a very, very difficult business because you have to get, with most science, you have to get the science, most new products, you've got to get the science correct. With antibiotics, you've got to get two things correct. You've got to get a business model correct, and you've got to get the science correct. Typically what happens with new antibiotics is because of the fact that there's very little new medicines being developed, doctors will only use these as third and fourth line treatments. As soon as that happens, it means that you will have very few patients actually use your antibiotic, which means you have to charge a very high price to get back research and development costs, which means that you will have difficulty with reimbursement, hospital listings, and things like this. And we have seen company after company with interesting medicine still go bankrupt after they got approvals. So one of the first things that we did was really try and think about what business models would work, and then look at markets that were large and almost reverse products in to look at ways that we could attack various problems and do it in a way that also made business sense. And as we go through this, you will see quite clearly that we thought a lot about the business models as we were developing these products. So next slide, who we are. We're a platform company. We're based out of Cayman. We've got operations in Montreal and Wuhan. The Montreal lab is specialized in phages and bioengineering, and Wuhan in license. We've got two trials that are basically ready to go now. One is for burn care, and that'll be done in Australia at the Royal Brisbane Hospital. And the second is in pressure ulcers, and that is likely to be done at Mayo, and hopefully one additional site in the U.S. We've also got a very strong license pipeline, and we've got technology that can be applied to many different additional areas. We've got some great shareholders in WuXi AppTec. The management team owns a large stake, and Foshan owns a large stake, along with a couple of leading Chinese VCs. Most of you know Yuan He and BioTrack. Next slide. AMR resistance. I don't really need to go very much into this, except that we all know that this is an increasingly large problem, that it's a tremendous burden on every health system in the world, that the number of deaths is growing exponentially. And we can see this again with the COVID-19. A lot of those deaths are attributed to AMR resistance rather than COVID creates the situation, and then the resistant bacteria basically results in the death. And this by 2050, WHO predicts actually that more patients will die from AMR resistance than will die from cancer. That's the size of the market. It's enormous. The problems are enormous, and the number of new medicines coming is very, very small. Next slide. Our products and the business model. What I'll show you in a second is that one of the keys to working with phages is that it creates a very, very new business model. And by this I mean it's going to be regulated in a very different way than most new medicines. In the US and Europe, it's going to be under it's under the biology division and also under the divisions that handle flu vaccines. Why? It's there because regulators want to treat phage products like perpetual products, meaning if we ever see any resistance, like the flu vaccine, we're able to immediately change those bacteria, the phages in and out. And this is a huge difference in business modeling, because as soon as doctors don't have to worry about antibiotic resistance, they can begin to use the product immediately as a first-line treatment. And this is really where one of the keys to our business model is being able to let every doctor use this product as a first-line treatment. But it doesn't end there. The second part of our business model that's important is that we believe that if we use this on every patient at risk, it's also going to save the hospitals money. And so the combination of being able to use a first-line product to save the hospitals money and to improve patient outcomes is one where all of a sudden our products make not just sense from a medical perspective, but also from a business perspective. So let me go on to the products specifically. This is slide 6 and going beyond that. What we've developed is a series of really unique phage products. Phages are quite old. They've been used forever, and they're quite effective. But the problem with it is that there is virtually no IP associated with phages. And so it's very easy to see in the future, every hospital can make a cocktail, every pharma company can make a cocktail. And so from a business perspective, that makes it difficult to invest. So we really didn't want to focus very much on pure cocktails. We do have one for burn, and burn is a little bit different because of the need in the market now. But we really focused on delivery systems that are patches and sprays. And they're really unique. They're unique in several ways. First, they're unique in terms of how they're made and how they work. We've taken phages, we've encapsulated them in a micropolymer, and this micropolymer allows the phages to be released over time. And this releasing over time is what will prevent the infections from happening in the first place. So if you take, for example, a pressure ulcer, when it first forms, there's no infection. And then in 5 to 10% of the patients, even when the nurses are putting on normal antibiotic cream and the bandages, we'll still see an infection, and these are largely antibiotic-resistant infections, and that's what our product is aimed to treat. So the nurse will take the normal cream that she's going to put on. She will either then spray or put our patch on top of that, and she'll put the normal bandage on. The product is designed to release over the next 2 to 3 days, and then the nurse will again do the same procedure. By doing this, we believe we will reduce infection rates by about 60%. The product is easy to use from the nurse's perspective. It can sit on the cart. It's safe at to be kept at room temperature. It's inexpensive, so the hospitals will save money. And reducing infection rates by 60% is obviously going to be a great thing. So we've got IP on the releasing of the polymers, and interestingly on the patch, we're then faced with the issue of sterilization. And we've got unique IP on how to sterilize a phage product as well. So when you look at the market, so this product is basically designed to address the 3 most common global problems for topical infections. It's a 14-phage cocktail designed to treat staph, Pseudomonas, and Klebsiella. And it's interesting in the sense, from a regulatory perspective, not only are we going to have quite a light regulatory approval, but it's also going to be very fast. When you look at the market size for pressure ulcers alone is about $5 billion. There is enormous pressure on the hospitals as well to reduce the number of hospital-acquired infections. And that's one of the reasons that hospitals seem so compelled by our products. It's not only is the problem big, but it's very costly for the hospital systems. Typically, as an example, in the US, for hospital-acquired infections, the cost to hospitals is about $3.2 billion. Their reimbursement, particularly from Medicaid, is very light, $200 a day. And so their cumulative reimbursement is only $2.1 billion. This means that hospitals themselves, with just pressure ulcer acquired infections, are losing about $1.1 billion a year. On top of that, they've got legal issues as well. A typical 300-bed hospital spends $1.645 million a year on settlement and legal costs associated with infections of pressure ulcers. So there's enormous incentives for the hospitals as well to improve this issue. So there's enormous incentives for them to save money. Our lead products are designed to exactly do that. Just to go over again, reducing infection rates by, we project, about 60%, saving hospitals money, and allowable for doctors and nurses to use as a first-line treatment. We also have a product for burn care. It's a pure phage cocktail. The reason that we believe that this is necessary is just because the situation is so bad for right now. It's going to be a product that can come to market quickly. It's a large market, and then we will also, for less severe burns, have the product we mentioned above. I should say the sprays, the patches. We will add indications for wound care. We'll add indications for burn care, and we will add indications for some aspects of diabetic ulcers. Altogether, the unmet need is about $15 billion per annum. So there's just a couple of technical slides. I don't want to go too much into it, but the technical slides show that our spray solution is really incredibly unique. It works by allowing the moisture from the burns to slowly release the phages themselves. and similarly on the patches, you can see that we've got quite a unique technology in terms of being able to sterilize the patches and being able to keep them then at room temperature on the nurse's cart, so very easy to use. There's a quick slide on cost of goods. For the spray itself, it's about $3.50. The calculations basically at the price that we would bring to market at even 15% reduction of infections allows a projected 1,000% return on our sales, but we expect the price to market to be much higher. Going to the next slide, which is regulatory pathways. As you can see, we believe that the FDA, the EMA, and almost certainly countries that follow what these two do are going to allow us quite fast regulatory approval lines. There are two different programs for fast track of our product in both FDA and EMA. It looks like we're going to do quite a small phase 1, phase 2, a limited phase 3 of about 376 patients, and then be able to bring our lead products to market. That's what we're doing out of our Montreal facility. Out of our Wuhan facility, we have built one of the best lysine teams in the world. Most of the original technology for lysins, and for those who don't know, a lysine is the enzyme produced by a phage that breaks down the cell wall of a bacteria. Most of this original work was done in Vince Vichetti's lab at Rockefeller. And in our Wuhan lab, we have scientists number 1 and number 3 out of that lab. Our lab is being led by Asaf Raz. He's an Israeli scientist who was at Vince Vichetti's lab at Rockefeller, leading that program for 6 years. And he has developed 2 lysins, one for staph, one for strep, that look to be significantly better than anything out there. Lysins can be used for a number of different things. Our staph lysin, we will be developing it ourselves for the treatment of acne in conjunction with P. acne lysin, and we also believe that there's a very large indication for treating the symptoms of eczema. About 95% of the itching that you see is caused actually by a staph bacteria, and this lysin works extremely fast in being able to eliminate those staph infections. We're not the first to have a staph lysin. The leading one is by Contrafect. It's a U.S. company. They're now in phase 3. They're testing for in vivo applications of bacteremia, sepsis, and endocarditis. Comparatively, we look to be about 10 times as good as that in application. In terms of lower MIC, we are someplace between 4 and 8 times lower, depending on how you measure that. So although we're not first, we're clearly best. There's another one that's been developed by a group out of Korea called Intron that was licensed to Roivant in New York for $667 million, of which about $40 million was effectively upfront. And we believe, again, that we're about 2 times as good as that one. And that has an interesting benefit. Contrafect believes that their product at peak sales in the US will have about $700 million US in revenue. We believe if we develop it for the same indications for Asia, We'll also have about a $700 million market opportunity. But the difference in strengths looks like we're also able to use ours in lung, either delivered intravenously or intratracheally. And at least in animal testing so far, the results have been significantly better than we would have projected. And as I mentioned, we've got a fast throughput system for developing more of these, and we're in the process of starting development on those other licenses that we're seeing in lung infections as well. We believe that our team is going to be able to develop license that work both intratracheally and intravenously. Intratracheally is very interesting because if it works there, it will certainly also be able to be added to ventilators as a preventative application as well. So both treatment and preventative, and the ventilators are designed to be able to add these in quite easily. So we're, as mentioned in a couple more slides here, we're able to develop this as a topical treatment. That's what we will be bringing forth ourselves from our company perspective, but we will be out licensing any license we develop that are used in body. Next slide, page 18. One of the important things, and one of the things that's really a scientific challenge, is if we're going to use these topically, they need to be stable at room temperature. For us, room temperature means 37 degrees. That's quite a challenge to do from a scientific perspective. And we don't want to overpromise this, but we've got data now going out 2 years on 2 different formulations that seem to keep the product very active after 2 years. Just a note on the atopic dermatitis market. It's large, growing larger per annum, and particularly for things like eczema, there are no effective, lower cost treatments available to patients today. So the out-licensing opportunities are significant. Bacteremia, endocarditis, joint infections, soft skin and soft tissues, and as we mentioned before, with pneumonia patients. As I also mentioned, this is on slide 21. Our animal testing has been really unbelievably better than we projected. License interact with our own albumin, our own serums, and they become much more active. In fact, as compared to a mouse, we're expecting about 10 times better efficacy in humans as compared to mice. And you can see how well it's working in mice to reduce lung infections. The next slide is on streptococcus. Just very quickly, you can see that our license is also, that we're developing, is also very effective on strep. And we've got some early work on some of the other problematic COVID-19 infections that are also looking quite good. Quick note on IP, we've got a lot of IP for a small company. It's both in the unique license, the sterilization of the phage products, and the encapsulation of phages. And finally, our team, it's relatively small, but very effective. And one of the reasons that it's very effective is we've got a wonderful partner in Wuxi, who's able to handle a lot of the non-core science. Nancy Towell is both a phage expert and a bioengineering PhD. She leads our team out of Montreal. She's an incredibly creative science. And Dr. Asaf Raz, as I mentioned to you, is one of the very top licensed scientists globally, and he leads our team in Wuhan. That's who we are. That's what we're trying to do. And again, apologize for the technical issues.
Thanks, Mark. Really thanks. And I think maybe we have about 15 minutes. So if all of the audience, if you have questions, you can raise hand and put your questions, and I will select some of the questions to ask. And the first, and I have a question I want to ask Mark is, it's a huge market in the future, right? And as you said, your Phagelux to be the Phagelux products, if the products become the first line treatment, that will much huger than now. So could you tell us about something why Phagelux product can become the first line treatment, and what is the drivers, and what would you like to do?
So we developed our products really starting from what does the nurse need? What does she want to get? And she wants to get a product that is going to reduce the amount of infections in the patients she sees. And she knows as well that the hospitals have an enormous problem every time they see an infection. It costs the hospitals money. And so if a product came along that's new, that was able to treat these problems, would she use it? And the answer is, generally speaking, no, because the doctors are so worried about antibiotic resistant problems that they will not prescribe new medicines. And so this is they want to keep it for when they know there's an antibiotic resistant infection, not to prevent the infection in the first place. Phages are regulated differently, as I said. Phages are regulated so that we're going to be able to update our product anytime we see a change in the bacteria, anytime we see a special need in any one market, anytime we see any resistance. This is the path that the FDA, the EMA, and almost certainly China will put us on, the ability to perpetually upgrade our product. And this allows the doctor not to worry about resistance. It allows the doctor, the nurse, to use this product from day one. So if we combine the ability to use it from day one, from regulatory perspective, if it improves patient outcomes, if it reduces hospital costs of use on every patient, we believe that it will quite rapidly become standard of care. The hospitals that we are going to run our initial trials also believe quite strongly and probably will support this initial trial with some of their own investment, and that would be great.
Okay, that is from what they need. And actually, like you said, the Phagelux are regulated in different countries or different regions, and also you have 14 phages. Could you please tell us about the standard or criteria? How do you select these phages as you have phages date?
So what we did is that we looked at those top 10 strains globally that are antibiotic resistant. And we wanted to make sure our cocktail covered 100% of those of those 10. And then we gathered libraries from across the world, China, US, Europe, etc. And we tested the cocktail against those libraries The top 10 represent about 80% of the infections. All of the rest represent the last 20%. So we wanted to have coverage on the top 10, 100%, and we had minimum coverage of 80% on the rest of the libraries. And it doesn't matter whether the bacteria comes from China, US, etc. And it's simply a lot of testing of different bacteria versus different phages. So once we had phages that worked against this large library of bacteria, we then had two further criteria. Number one, it has to be manufacturable. And number two, it has to be stable over a long period of time. And so that's how our cocktails were developed. It has to have a very large range of bacteria that it covers. It has to be manufacturable on scale, and it has to be stable,
effective, stable
over a long period of time. Yeah. And that combination really requires some significant knowledge on how to do that. And one of the things you'll find is that they become less stable if the receptors are too similar to each other. So we also look for phages that in the cocktail have different sorts of receptors.
Yeah, as it's a new product, I think you should put some time to persuade the doctors, even in China or in the other countries. And as you mentioned, you have some
surprise. Go
okay.
ahead. Sorry.
As you mentioned, you have some the challenges on technology side, but I think if you want to expand more of the market in China, maybe you will have some business challenges. So what kind of the business challenge do you imagine, or in which way, what kind of cooperation you would like to need in China?
Yeah, so number one business challenge for any small company is you don't have enough resources. As you know, Sean, I've built companies to be quite big companies from startup. When you get to about a company of about 250 people, you're able to do many things well. When you're a company of 50 people, there's many things you don't do well. And when it comes to investors, I'm really looking for people who are able to add more than just money, because as a small company, you need a lot of resources. Wuxi Aptec, as an example, is a great partner for us because they're able to provide a lot of preclinical support. We also need market support. We need regulatory support. We need key opinion leader support. You know, the list of the support we need is almost longer than the skill sets we have. We've had the ability to develop some really unique products, and beyond that, we're going to need support in many different ways. And I prefer to have more active partners than purely passive partners.
Okay, thanks. I don't know if our audience have questions, but I haven't seen any question. If you have questions, just raise your hand and put out your questions. But we only have several minutes. Would you yes. There's one question.
I was just going to add one thing.
Okay, please.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. There's one question from one audience from Ling. Does the product induce phage resistance by pathogen?
Theoretically, yes, but we have not seen it. Resistance is actually really difficult to force resistance for phages. Separately, we've also got an agriculture company. We spray phages on fields. This is a warm environment. This is a moist environment. We don't kill 100%. And in the 5 years we've been doing that, we haven't seen any change in the bacteria. So theoretically, it's possible, which is why the FDA has given us this path of being able to change the products rapidly. But we actually don't believe that that's going to happen. I would like to just add one other thing that's important, I think.
Okay.
I am so confident in our science that in this next round, I'm going to be adding $2 million of my own money in. It just is looking really, really good.
Wow. You have a lot of confidence. And I guess the investor will have the confidence as you have put in some new money. So in end, do you have anything to summarize? Or?
No, I think you're correct. This is brand new science. It's going to be a little bit challenging on the business end because there will be education involved. We do need partners that are able to bring capital and additional expertise to help fill in some of those areas where we're not so strong. But our science is looking very, very compelling. It's large markets. It's huge unmet needs. It's growing fast. It's a market where hospitals are struggling because of the difference between the cost and the amount that they're able to get reimbursed. And we've developed a product that can be used as a first line that doctors and nurses immediately understand, that are easy to use, that look to be quite effective, and we're very, very optimistic on the future. But you go back to why we started the company in the first place. Antibiotic resistance is a problem that is going to surpass cancer in terms of lives lost by 2050. It's a market where developing new products is difficult. We're developing new small molecule products is almost impossible. And it's a market where we've got to find better ways, new ways to treat patients, to reduce death. COVID-19 is just an example. We've got, when 57% of the patients have a secondary infection here in China that's contributing to death, that problem needs to be solved. Okay. It's for COVID-19 a problem now. It's for VAP infections in general. H1N1, 25% of those patients who died had a secondary lung infection. It's an area where across the board, we need to do more to get better patient outcomes.
Okay, actually, due to the time limit here, we will finish. But I still have, I got one question from the audience. I think maybe Mark should answer that question. What's the biggest marketing challenge right now compared to the competitive products or substitutes? Actually, you answered the same.
Yeah, so I should disclose that for China, for any market, education is going to be really important. For China, we do have a distinct advantage. One of the companies I founded was a company called Haoyisan. So we're going to be able to, at least in the China market, to be able to do a lot of education rapidly to doctors on this new science. In other markets, education is going to be a challenge, but the good news is that doctors and nurses understand. They just touch our products and they know how to use them. They know the benefits, and they're enthusiastic about wanting to try.
Yes. To my understanding is your challenges. One is for the science, but you have a lot of great scientists, and the other challenges for the business. But for the business challenges, we need more cooperation from every resources companies like the industry and every other, like the clinical trials or regulatory. And finally, I think, Mark, thanks. You gave us a great presentation, and I think your the company and the product have a huge marketing future. Though the companies are in the early stages, and in the future you do a lot of education on the market. But I still think it's a good opportunity. So due to the time limit, I think we will finish today's webinar. And thank you, Mark, and thanks, Howard, and thank all of our audience. If your audience, the investor, if you have questions you want to follow, you can contact us. You can contact Mark directly, or you can contact us MSQ. MSQ Ventures, we will providing our services to you investors, and we will link the technology. We will link the resources between China and overseas. Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.